Well, hello, and welcome back to Rosie's Preserving School. And autumn time, we've all got gluts of things, and tonight we're going to be making piccalilli. So I hope that you'll be able to use some of perhaps your own glut or someone else's if you know people with allotments and that kind of thing. I've been absolutely inundated with apples this year. We've got a new apple tree which has decided to be covered in apples, so much so that the old apple tree is sulking. We've only had about 2 on that one, thank goodness. Otherwise I wouldn't have known what to do with them all. I'm about halfway through and I've been bottling apple, cooked apple, ready for crumbles and things in the winter and other things. I do it unsweetened because then I can sort of use it any which way that I want to, or even use it in a chutney or something later on when the fresh apples are maybe not around. And the other thing we've had a lot of is tomatoes, and that's because I plant a lot of tomatoes. I grow a lot of tomatoes because we like passata, and we talked a bit in the last term about making passata, and that's what I do with all of my tomatoes. We eat a few fresh, but we use tomato sauce in the base for soup or casseroles, that kind of thing, pasta sauces a lot. So I make the passata by roasting the tomatoes in the oven with onions and garlic. Sometimes one lot I've just done has got courgette in it as well, because I've got lots of courgettes to use as well, and who hasn't? And then I roast it all, put it through the food processor, and then I water bath it to seal the jars, and then we use it through the winter, or anyone really. So this is just a tomato based one with no courgette and red tomatoes, and I had a lot of yellow tomatoes this year which have ripened later, and they are, you can see the difference. That's the yellowy one, which is much more of a brown, or don't know what color it is really, sauce, but it doesn't matter, it all tastes lovely. And then I do some very sort of tiny jars as well, because they're often handy. You don't always want, you know, a litre or half a litre of sauce. If you just want a little bit for something, it's handy to have a few smaller jars. So that's mainly what I'm about at the moment, is doing all of that kind of thing. Brenda's asking, how long do the apples keep? Oh, they keep for years, Brenda, but I try to keep using them. Otherwise, you know, the next year's apples are coming along before you've used last year's. But they will, I cook the apple first, just with a very little water and no sugar. Then I put it in the jars and I water bath them to seal them and sterilize it all. And then they will keep for 2 or 3 years minimum, really. But I do try and use it up. Otherwise, as I say, you get a bit of a backlog of things. So if you have got gluts of things you're trying to deal with, all my runner beans are now in the freezer that we haven't eaten. I've got just a handful left. That frankly I don't want. I always get to this point, I expect a lot of people do, where you don't want to see another runner bean, and certainly not to deal with it and blanching it and drying it and freezing it and all the rest of it. So what I'm going to do with those beans, because they're slightly tougher now, is to just prep them and blanch them, and then I'm going to dehydrate them and make them into a powder, because then I can add that to soups and things. It will be, you'll still have the same nourishment from the beans, but you know, they won't be as runner beans, because I hate it if there's even a hint of them being a little bit stringy or tough in any way. So that will actually deal with that. And I read about someone doing that the other day, and I thought that's a brilliant idea actually. So that's what I'm going to do with the last few. So tonight we're going to make piccalilli, which is it's not really a chutney and it's not really a pickle. It's pretty much unique in the preserving world. It's the only preserve, or a chutney type preserve, where it's thickened with flour, which if you if you need to be gluten-free, then you can use gluten-free flour, or you could use, you know, like I've talked about the tomato skins, making a starchy thickener. Or now we've got a product on the website actually, which is it's a completely sort of inert product. It's called clear gel, and you mix it with water to the desired consistency, and you can add that to anything. It's got no flavour of its own. It's not sweet, it's not savoury, and you can thicken things with that. So you could actually use that to thicken the piccalilli a bit if you need to avoid the flour. It's a modified cornstarch, the clear gel, and they've taken out the bit that it causes the problem with well, there's no gluten in it because it's cornstarch. So you know, it's a good thing to have if you want to thicken things without gluten. So those of you who've looked at the recipe, you will know this is a day before prep, because you, as with a lot of fleshy vegetables, and we've talked about this in the past, in order to preserve them safely, you need to remove a lot of the water. Now, if you're making a standard chutney, then you will remove that water by cooking, and the steam will come off and the water will evaporate. And then you will replace that water with your vinegar, sugar, and salt, the 3 preservatives. We're going to be using them all tonight in this. Sometimes we only use sugar, as in jams and so on, and sometimes we use a mixture. But if you don't remove the water, the vinegar will be diluted and it won't preserve the piccalilli. The vinegar is 5% acetic acid, and it needs to stay around that level to be effective as a preservative. And if you don't do this soaking, and it does mean whether you're doing anything like pickled onions or anything like that, which has got lots of water in it, and the recipe instructs you to salt it or put it into a brine, that is what you should do. And I'll demonstrate in a moment the effect of that. So I was just checking there were no more questions. So yesterday I chopped up my vegetables, and I've got a mixture here, and there's about 3 kilos or 6 pounds of mixed autumn or late summer autumn vegetables. I've got cauliflower, courgette, cucumber, onion, and normally I put green beans in, but because we're that bit later making this, our green beans excuse me, finished, so I put some of the runner beans in. Actually, it doesn't matter what you put in as your mixture. This is the mixture I like, and I've always stuck to it. But some people put sweet corn in, they put carrots in, they could put chili in, but I quite like the fact that this is something that I never put chili in, because it's got its own spices and its own distinctive flavour. Now, as I'm prepping this, you'll notice the pieces are more or less the same size. I mean, don't get too hung up on that, but it helps if they're more or less the same size. And then as you go, you put the vegetables into the bowl and salt it as you go. Now, that isn't an exact science. You just put salt on in the layers. I just sprinkle it over, and I use sea salt now to do this, but it doesn't matter what you choose to use. And then you leave it overnight. And I prefer it to do it this way because it's very obvious what effect it has. You can, some recipes ask you to make a brine, so a wet mixture of water and salt, and put the vegetables in those. But I think if you're a beginner, it's helpful to see that the liquid that comes off from the vegetables is very visible and obvious, and you can sort of take comfort from that you've done the right thing. Now I've got a colander here, and I'm now going to put my vegetables into the colander, and I'm going to ask my sous chef Trev, he's not Sue, he's Trev, to rinse off the salt. Now that doesn't mean you immerse the whole thing in bowls of water and leave it to soak. because what will happen then is that the vegetables will absorb that water back again, and you're back to square one. So you need to, I'm just going to put an amount, I'll put about half the vegetables in the colander, and I'm going to give them to Trev to go, because I can't do all that bit. He's going to rinse them under running water fairly briefly. It doesn't need to be for any lengthy time. The salt will wash off. There will be some residual salt flavour, but it's not like you would think it would be. We're not going to add any more salt to the recipe. What we'll end up with is a very well seasoned preserve. So if you put those into that bowl, into the in the pan, yeah, for me, that's probably the easiest thing. Don't worry. And then we'll do the second half the same. So you can put what mixture you like. What bit, you're going to take the bowl over there and do it. That'll probably be easiest. And then thank you. As I say, depending on what vegetables you've got, but it does tend to be fairly sort of crunchy things, and things that you can leave the skin on, and it's mostly green, to be fair. I know people put carrots in and sweet corn and things, so it's up to you. Whatever you've got and whatever you like is the mantra, isn't it? You know, all of these things came from the basis that people were preserving what they had, so we'll follow that. But this just happens to be my personal favourites. So where's Rachel gone? Are you rinsing yours, Rachel? Good. I've just got to wait for the staff to do mine. Oh, it's quite annoying, really, having to keep on waiting for things that you do routinely and you can't do them. So that's it. Just give it a good. Now, in my pan here, the recipe says 2.5 pints of vinegar or 1.5 litres. So you want to put in the pan either a litre or 2 pints, and you keep back some of it to make the mix at the end with the flour and everything. So you don't put all the vinegar in at the beginning. Let's just give them a bit of a... That's it. So ideally you would put the vinegar and sugar into the pan first, but because I've had to do it this way, mine are in the pan. But Rachel, if you put your vinegar in, I've got mine measured here, so I'm going to put that in the pan and turn on the heat. I'm not sure. These are quite good. I mean, what the effect, sometimes if these have been soaking for 24 hours, sometimes I leave them a little bit longer if it just doesn't work out that I can get to make the Piccalilli immediately. And it ends up like when you sit in the bath for too long, all the vegetables go all sort of wrinkly. They've lost so much water. But what will happen now, they're in the vinegar, they will take the vinegar into their cells, and that's what will preserve them long term. Now, so the recipe, the sugar, mustard and ginger and garlic gets put in at this stage with the vinegar, and it should be blended together before you put the vegetables in, but I've had to do it that way around. So I've got my sugar here, which is just white granulated. This is one sort of chutney type preserve that we don't use one of the brown sugars for, because you want to keep that sort of colour. And if you put the brown sugar in and then the turmeric at the end, the yellow, it would all get a bit muddy looking. So we're going to use 275 grams or 9 ounces of white granulated sugar. So I'm going to put that in. Where's my spoon? I'm just going to have to stir this very well because I'm putting it all in back to front. So that's my sugar. Give that a stir. All ends up in the same place, doesn't it? And then mustard powder, just dry mustard powder, that's 1 tablespoonful. This is one of the things that helps to thicken it. So put that in. And then the other thing at this stage is ground ginger, 1½ teaspoonfuls. Well, I don't really do half teaspoonfuls, so I'm going to put 2 of my teaspoonfuls in. There we are. Give that a stir, and then all I've got to do is put the garlic in. The garlic doesn't have much water, so you don't have to worry about that too much. So I'm just going to peel this. Nice fat cloves these are, so they're sort of easier to cut up. When they're tiny, it's just so, I don't use the various machines and things, you know, the bits of kit you can get to do garlic, because so much of it stays behind, doesn't it? So I tend to end up just chopping. There we go. And then I slice across, split it in half, and the other way. Trev just hits it with a great big knife and smashes it and then chops it up. I'm hopeless at chopping things efficiently. There we go. Let's walk that bit done. You can see from the pan all those things have blended in okay, even though I did put them in back to front, so we're okay there. And everything looks nice and green. Now you don't want to end up cooking this for too long. I think it says on there 20 minutes is plenty, because you want the vegetables to stay with a bit of bite. You don't want them all sort of mushy. That's not the name of the game. If you look at the picture on the front of the cover of the recipe, that's how they need to be. So you've got lumps that crunch. Little bits of garlic, and they could go in. I grew garlic this year. I planted it last autumn, as in, you know, as usual. And I think what I pulled up this year was smaller than I'd actually sown. It was absolutely terrible. So I haven't got any homegrown garlic. I'll just stir that in, and I can hear that it's coming up to the boil. Well, it's heating up anyway. So the cauliflower, when I cut up the cauliflower, oh sorry, there's a question. Rachel's saying she's concerned because she had to use frozen cauli. It should be okay, Rachel. Just keep an eye on it and don't overcook it, you know. But you'll soon find out. What I found with the cauliflower is there's quite a lot of waste, isn't there, with the cauliflower? So I tend to cut off the really outside big chunky bits of the leaf stalk, and then I cut out the stem, and everything else I cut into pieces about that big, and then all of the stalky bits from the florets, I chop those up, slice them across, and then the big center stem, it changes. At the top it's quite soft and tender, and then it gets really tough. If you can cut the bit where it's soft and tender, you can then slice that and chop it across like I did the garlic, only bigger, and put all that in as well. There's no point wasting it, and it all tastes the same once it's been, you know, cooked and got the spices in and everything. So don't waste it, and or be it doesn't need to look sort of pretty, if you know what I mean, because it all ends up looking the same. So you'll get much more from your cauliflower like that, I find. So I'm just going to rinse my hands because I've got I'm all sticky. For the second part of the recipe, we need this to come up and start cooking. But the second part of the recipe is we're just going to, once it's cooked sufficiently, is to just thicken it, and it's in its own sort of sauce, which, as I say, is nothing like a normal chutney would be. Chutneys originally came from India in the time of all these sorts of things became popular at the time of the Raj and all the spices and everything in the Indian food. And chutney was one way of kind of seasoning food, really. And it comes from the Indian word chutney, which I presume means something else in Indian. I'm not at all sure. But and Piccalilli is an Indian word as well. And so many of our chutneys do have origins from India, and thank goodness for it, because they're all very, very tasty. Now in this, we've already got the mustard, we've got the ginger, which is going to give it a bit of heat. As I say, you can put green or red chilies in if you want to as well. But the main spice is turmeric, which is, as we know now, very, very good for us. It's an antioxidant. And an anti-inflammatory, and it's used a lot by people who have sort of stomach issues, that kind of thing. They drink it in milk to sort of calm stomach pain and so on. And it also, it's a root, it grows like ginger. It's a bit of a finer root, you know, the ginger root's quite big and knobbly. The turmeric roots are finer and slimmer. I've never used the fresh root. I've never been successful in finding it, to be honest. But you could do, I presume, in a recipe like this. But I always have used the dried version. And it's got a very distinctive smell. And the plant is very much like a ginger plant. If you grow ginger, which you can do from the ginger root, I expect, like me, you've sometimes kept it too long and it starts growing of its own accord, you know, there's a green shoot growing out. And turmeric is the same. They're similar sort of, like the lily families and the dahlias, you know, they grow from a corm, more or less, just below and on the surface. So they and then they go along and replicate and grow along in a sort of, in a line. So we're going to be adding 2 tablespoonfuls of turmeric in a moment, and it's a thickener as well. It will thicken things considerably. So again, if you have gluten issues, the turmeric will help thicken this without the flour. So I've got my jug here that I had my vinegar in before, and I've got 50 grams or 2 ounces of flour in this jug. And I'm going to add the turmeric to that. Be very, very careful, because as you can see, it is bright yellow and it will stain anything that you get it onto. So any cloths or tea towels, your clothes, it will stain. So although it's such a beautiful colour, just be careful with it splashing or anything like that, because it will spoil. You know, it's not very forgiving. You know, it's a bit of a challenge for the old vanish, I think. So I'm going to mix that with the flour. Now this is where your other vinegar comes in, the vinegar that you didn't use from the recipe in the beginning. So I'm going to have half a litre, because I put in a litre. So whatever measurement you use, put in the remaining vinegar. As I've said before, with these big vinegars, if you turn them on their side to pour, they don't splash. I only learnt that about 6 months ago. I could have saved myself being covered in vinegar all these years. So now you want to add that together, and like adding any liquid to a powder, you will get sort of lumps if you're not careful. So just add enough to sort of get it wet, and then start mixing it together. It does come good in the end, but it doesn't look promising at the beginning. And it's one of those things, if you leave it standing, it will all sink to the bottom, and you haven't got to start again exactly, but you do have to sort of give it a good mix before you then pour it into your pan mix. Any lumps you see, just to give them a squash with a spoon, and you should be all right. I never get it completely smooth, but it seems to end up all right in the mixture, so don't get too worked up about it. Now it is nice and runny. Just take that off the spoon. You always get some stuck to the spoon, don't you? That it's the same making pancakes and things. On there. Oh, it's a Hindi word. I've seen it spelled Chutney, which is why I said chutney, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but I dare say it's like a lot of these things, Rachel. There's lots of derivations and lots of people laying claim to it. I know it isn't our word, that's for sure. It's not a British word that, you know, that's where it's come from originally. Now, if you have a look at the pan, it's coming up and heating up nicely. It's losing some of its color. Look, it's not, there's some of the bright green, and then the rest is sort of, it's darkening slightly. So we don't want it to cook very much longer before we add in our mixture. I'm interested to see how this works out, having the runner beans in it, because actually that will be a good use for them in future years. If it's funny, you get used to using the same thing all the time, and you're loath to move away from it, but actually it might bring improvement. I don't know, but I used white wine vinegar for this. You can use any pale vinegar. You can use white distilled vinegar. You can use cider. I happen to have some white wine vinegar, that you know, I've got quite a lot spare, so I thought I would use that this time, because I'm trying to sort of keep away from shops and things at the moment, and frankly most of them haven't got anything in from what I've read. So use what you have, but obviously the darker the vinegar, the darker the mix will be, so try and keep it on the pale side if you can. So that's, I'll give it another few minutes, get some more lumps out of my turmeric mixture. That's that. Make sure you don't put this spoon down on anything because it will stain. And then Tracy, I'm no more than 20 minutes from when you put the vegetables into the pan. If you've got the vinegar heated up with the sugar, like I should have had, put the vegetables in, and then it's literally 10 to 15 minutes. And they're pretty much done now. If we can have the camera back, you can see how they are. And I'm going to pour this turmeric mixture in, and then you can see, so you can see the color has gone a little bit from them, but they're still quite firm. You don't want this to be cooked down so it's all sort of sloppy. So here's my turmeric mixture. I'll try not to splash the cameraman. I'm going to pour all that in, and then I'm going to quickly stir it because it will start to thicken. And this is where the magic happens. So all this goes a lovely yellow color, very bright, very inviting, and it smells incredible. Turmeric's one of those things that when you sort of smell it in the jar or however, you think, oh, you know, but once like this, it's all mixed. Can you see how it's thickened almost straight away? I'm going to turn it down slightly because I do want it to cook out the starch a bit. So I'll leave it cooking for a few moments to do that, but I don't want it to stick to the bottom of the pan. But already you can see how beautiful your chutney is going to be, your piccalilli, sorry, still thinking about the chutney. Now, when it's cool, it will thicken. Like any sauce with a flour base, it will thicken more when it's cold. But you don't want it to be thick in the jar, that you've got to kind of, you know, you don't want, you know, when bread sauce goes cold, it's sort of solid, and you don't want it like that. You still want some sort of juicy bits, if you know what I mean. And if you look at the picture again on the front page of the recipe, on this lovely piece of brie and the ham, the juice is all running down onto the board, and that's how you want it to be, really. It tastes fabulous like that. So don't cook it on so long that you end up with a sort of custard. I'm going to get my jars over to me. Now, as ever, these I do ahead because I don't want the oven on while I'm doing this, because it would interfere with the sound. But before you start anything that you're going to jar up hot, you need to wash your jars and ideally put them in a warm oven, about 50 to 100 degrees, for at least 15 minutes to get them dry. You don't want to be potting up hot preserves into wet jars. So get them into the oven, make sure they're dry before you start using them. I've got some of these bigger ones because I'm working back to front I haven't had the photography done beforehand because I couldn't organise it. I'm actually going to have it done afterwards. So these are my jars for the photography. And then I've got some other ones that we've discontinued on the website that I'm going to use up for us, just to, they're not suitable really, but we just want to get them used up and out of the way. Otherwise we get buried in jars. So I'll use them up in a bit to do the lot. Now you can see this makes quite a lot, and it's a good preserve to make for your own use. It's good as a gift. Men especially seem to love Piccalilli, and I've had grown men weeping at fairs that I've been at where they've tasted a sample of it before they've bought it. And they're sort of, oh, that's just like my grandma used to make, you know. There's something about Piccalilli that they love. Now, when I did used to go to food fairs and things, I made a beetroot chutney. I used to make two versions. I had the standard beetroot and apple chutney, and then I would make some, I would use one of those stick blenders, and I would blend it in the pan so that it was smooth. Because I thought, if you like beetroot in sandwiches, then it would be handy to have something you could spread and that didn't fall out in your lap when you were trying to eat it. And it was very successful. People loved it, and I made, you know, hundreds of jars of it. And I thought the same with the Piccalilli. I thought, oh, I'll blend it, and then it would be a spreadable version. You know, nobody would touch it. They didn't like it. It tasted the same. And I thought it would be brilliant to have in sandwiches. No, they'd rather try and get big lumps of cauliflower in, you know. And so I gave up on that. But it is something you could do if you felt that it was something you would like. Now, the big C is coming up, as I say, at the end of the year. And this is a good hamper make as well. I'm going to have to get my assistant to lift that off for me onto my heat pad. It's all right, assistant. It's not hot. Thank you very much. You know, great for hampers, great for Christmas gifts, great for, you know, elderly uncles or granddads who you don't know what to give them, because you don't really find this kind of flavour in a commercial mix. So we've got, I'm going to take that on. You know I'm going to knock it onto the floor. So we'll get that out of the way as well. Now I've got my big jars here, which are called salsa jars, which that's what they are, aren't they? That's what you'd buy salsa or a tomato sauce in. So get a good mix, and you've got it. This is one of those ones you can see there's lots of liquid ratio to vegetables. When it's in the jar, those vegetables will soak up some of that liquid. So make sure you get it sort of evened out between the jars. This is going to catch in my throat now, and while I'm trying to talk and do this at the same time. Ladle it in, and you will find as it thickens and the vegetables, they've been turned yellow on the surface, but when they're in the jar, they kind of absorb more of it, and it goes all the way through like a stick of rock. Now these jars aren't any different to any other. You fill them right to the top, take out the funnel. Then if you use a spoon, you can press down and get the bits under the juice so that they don't dry out. I think we can get another lump or two of cauliflower in there. Do the same again, press it down gently, and then it should be fine. Here's my lid. Put my lid on straight away. Oh, that's hot. There we are. So then as they cool, they absorb some of the liquid, and they'll cool down and shrink a bit, and everything will lower in the jar. The level in the jar will lower, but because you've sealed it, it will then be a vacuum. So the Piccalilli will keep for at least a year, if not longer, on the shelf at room temperature, and you do not need to refrigerate it once it's open. So always fill to the top, always get the contents under the surface. And then you shouldn't have any problems whatsoever. There we go. Under you go. Now the lid. So how Rachel getting on? Are you okay? So we've got Rachel's mouth is watering. Yeah, there you are. You see, Rachel's mum said that her mum, her nana, used to make Piccalilli, and it's sort of fallen out of fashion with being made, but it's never fallen out of fashion with my customers. It's one of the most popular things that I made, especially at shows and things like that. But,
Elizabeth's asking about water bathing.
Oh, hi Elizabeth, I hadn't seen you arrive. No, you don't need to water bath it, just seal it up, make sure you fill right to the top. You only need to water bath this if you're using 2-part lids, which you might well be in California, but if you're using a lug lid like we have on our jars, then you don't need to water bath. Yeah, if you've got 2-part, you'll have to do that to create the seal, otherwise you won't get a proper seal, I'm afraid. But you should only need to do it for about 10 minutes, I would think. It's only to seal the jar. It's not going to do anything to the contents at all. So if you do it as soon as they're in the jar, while it's still hot, you should only need to do it for a small amount of time. It's all right, Rachel. It will, as I said, it will thicken up because it's got a flour base, and also the vegetables will absorb more of the liquid. These jars, for the salsa jars, it's just the 063 standard lid, the most popular size. So, you know, it's just an 063 lid on these jars. That's why I like them so much, because they don't need anything special.
What do you eat it with? That's the question.
What do you eat it with? Cheese, mostly really good cheese. But as I say, I always say when I'm writing it, and I think I put on the recipe, you need some good cheese, some brilliant bread, Piccalilli, a pint of beer, and a cricket match for the ideal conditions for eating Piccalilli. But you can have it with cold meats and things like that. Whatever floats your boat, really. Right, where's my silly little short jars? I'll use some of those in a moment. So again, press down, make sure everything's submerged so that it gets the best possible chance to absorb all that lovely juice, and then pop the lid on. All right, I'll do the rest in a moment. Like a charcuterie board, yeah, absolutely. Bread for dipping into all that lovely mustardy sauce. Yeah, I think that's the only way I've eaten it. But as I say, you know, just try out things. If you think, oh, I know what will go well with that. I mean, I don't know what it would be like mixed with plain yogurt on top of a curry or something. You know, it might be lovely, might not. I don't know, but try things out. You know, that's the way new things happen, is to have a go. I think I might have overfilled this little jar in my enthusiasm. Oh no, not too bad. Yeah, I said to Rachel,
Okay.
it will thicken because it's got the flour base as it gets cold,
Okay.
and it will also get absorbed by the vegetables. So that runniness,
Mm.
it needs to be a little bit runny, Rachel, like thick cream, really. As I say, you don't want a set custard. That's not the right look. Anyway, there we have it. The lovely Piccalilli. It's just one of a kind. I don't know of anything else that is like it at all. But it's none the worse for that. I think it's great to you know, be in front of the crowd sometimes and leading the way. But we will be making chutney in a couple of weeks' time, I think it is. Next week, we're going to be making something a little bit different. Not so much a food, more of a winter standby, which is elderberry cough-linctus, which is made from elderberries, funnily enough, and other lovely things. The recipe is on the site, so if you can log in, you can get the recipe ahead. Now, with all my medical troubles, I missed the elderberries completely here because they were quite early. Even the flowers were really, really late, and then the berries came really quite early, and I missed picking them. So I'm going to be using dried elderberries, which do just as well. If you don't need as many of them. But if you still can find some fresh elderberries, go and grab them. Now, you know when you've got the elderberries on the stalk, or all the berries there, the way to prep them is to use a dinner fork and hold the thick stalk and just comb the berries off into a colander, and you'll get nearly all of them off like that, and you won't end up with purple hands, and you won't squash the berries either. Then just rinse them under a tap to get rid of any stalky bits or any dust or anything, and then you can freeze them until needed. So if you can see any in between this week and next week, and you want to use fresh, then go and grab them. And but I'll be using dried, so that's an alternative as well. But normally I pick a load and I have them in the freezer to use in chutneys and all sorts of things. But you don't need very many. So look at the recipe and then go and see what you can find, because it may be in your part of the world, you know, they're still about, but they certainly aren't here. They're all shriveled up on the tree. But yeah, you could do, Rachel. Mix it first with a little tiny bit of vinegar. Don't just put it in, otherwise it will go lumpy. So has anyone else got any other questions? I think we've covered all of that, and we'll make the elderberry cough-linctus next week. Actually, that I took that when I came out of hospital. There's a lot of coughing involved, and it was really quite painful. And I found I had it 3 days running, the elderberry linctus, and it cleared it all up completely, and it hasn't come back. So I was very grateful that that was last year's elderberry linctus. I was glad I still had a couple of bottles around. So that will be something a little bit different, as something for your winter store cupboard for ailments. So I'll see you all next week, and have a good week. Thank you.